I am so thrilled to have Gary here with us. And I'm going to ask him to start off with some little history, maybe spend the first half hour talking about the history of yourself and the work that you're doing and how it came to be the aliens and the ships and all this kind of stuff to do with and then we can go into the more modern stuff now that your book you've written. We're going to talk about that. And we also want to know what you're doing now since the book has been written and what new insights you've had. We understand that the code is a little more developed. I'm hoping you're going to talk a lot about the code. And then, of course, hopefully we'll have time afterwards for some questions. So, Gary, you told me that you could talk our socks off. So I'm happy to have you talk a lot. And as the questions come rolling in, we'll try to get them in at the appropriate time. It may be towards the end, because if Gary's rolling, I'm not going to interrupt him. Anyway, Gary, please take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on. Yeah, I could go back to when, because I'm involved with the Rendlesham incident, I'd go back to the year 1980 when Jim Penniston had his encounter with the unidentified craft of unknown origin in Rendlesham Forest, England. And during that year, I was in a rock band. I played guitar, played lead guitar. And we were kind of gigging around London, Surrey, and Kent. And we had a family business as well, a graphics business. So that was what I was doing when that incident happened in 1980, December 1980. And it was a few years after that when the News of the World newspaper broke the story one Sunday. It was a Sunday national newspaper. And on the front, you know, UFO lands in forest, you know, and it was to do with a USAF base, as people know about the case. And I remember reading that and thinking, you know, things are going to be, you know, certainly interesting in the future, because it's like the first time a military base had been involved with a UFO incident. So I did kind of follow the story as time went on. And in 1993, which is the same year that Jim Penniston had retired, in 1993, I had a strange experience, which I call my core experience. And I did kind of experiment a bit with a hypnagogic state, which is where you try to remain awake at the point of going to sleep, at the point of falling into sleep. And I was experimenting with that, and I got quite successful with it. And I realized that if you try to remain at a point of sleep, and sustain it, and the more you sustain it, you enter a different world. It's like all the time, visual patterns, and people have said this is like lucid dreaming, that they can control the dream. It's like you're awake and asleep at the same time, but neither. It's like a third state of consciousness, altered state of consciousness. So I was kind of messing around with that, and really it was because based on a book that I had read by Colin Wilson. I mean, internationally known, but he was well known in the UK. And he used to write about mysteries and occult. He wrote about the hypnagogic stuff. And that's the reason why I was kind of experimenting with that. And then one night I had a dream. It was a hypnagogic dream because it seemed so real. I was in this corridor, this kind of curved corridor, and there was doors leading into the center of this curved corridor. And there was this monitor or TV, large TV on the wall. It's someone sitting in front of it, and it was fritzing. It was, you know, like the snow effect you get between channels. And then I felt something rumbling in the room, or this curved corridor, and I felt it traveling up my feet. And then I realized I was laying on the bed, and what was going through my legs, this vibration, and it was pulse first of all, started traveling up to my head, and then back down again, and then up, and then down. And it was gaining in frequency, and it was oscillating back and forth. And while that was going on, it was like, what? I couldn't believe it. It was a coarse vibration at first. But I thought it's strange because it's like my body's been keeping this secret all these years, and I was experiencing this coarse vibration at first, which went throughout the body, and then started to refine, and vibrations became more refined, and it traveling up and down my spine, and it was gaining in frequency and getting faster and faster, and then bang, it was like a bright white light. I just hope, is everybody getting what I'm saying about this experience? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll carry on then, and it culminated. It was climactic. This kind of bright explosion in the center of my head, and it was strange when I came down off that experience. I thought, what was that? What was all that about? You know, something that I'd never experienced before. But the days following, I was getting all this information coming to me, and I was writing it down. I would be at work because I was in the graphics business, and I would write down on pieces of card whatever I was working on, pieces of paper that I found, and I would just stuff it all in my pocket, write down the insights I was getting, and put it in my pocket, and then get back home and put it all onto a 4 megabyte RAM machine at that time. So I would come home, and I would, as I say, I would transfer everything the insights I had, which I had on paper, and I'd even write on a cigarette box or whatever came to hand at the time when I was having the insight, get home and put it all on a 4 megabyte RAM machine computer, and on the word processor at the time. And it got to the point where I was writing down all these insights, and if I'd have printed out what I'd written down, it'd probably be about 2 inches stack of paper. So, and there was all these kind of insights into frequencies, mini black hole white holes, you know, black hole white holes at the centers of elementary particles, and also to do with ancient Egypt as well. For some reason, it kept leading me to the pyramids. So I would say that as a result of that experience, I was having all these insights into things, and I got in touch with Jack Sephardi, the physicist, theoretical physicist, because he had been working on many black hole white holes with this Indian physicist, trying to think, it was Siddharth, and I got in touch with him through Fred Alan Wolf, and I asked him about the mini black hole white holes, because I said, I've added insights into this. And he says, yeah, that's what we've been working on. He says, I've got an equation for it all. And I said, it's like alternating mini black hole white holes, you know, at the centers of elementary particles. I said, and that's what keeps everything stable, because, you know, energy is being kind of sucked in like a black hole would, but then projected out at the same time. So it's keeping everything in balance. So he said, yeah, that's what we've been working on. So I thought, well, okay, there's some validity there to the insights I was getting. And then we corresponded some more, and then he put me on his list with all these other people. And some of those people were in the UFO group, the aviary, yeah. And they had all these bird names, and but it's not what they didn't make this group themselves. It was one of the writers who was writing about them and saying that, you know, you could, you know, reference this group as, he was the one who was giving them the bird names. I don't know if you know about that, Mark, the aviary.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, some of the people on there, Jacques Vallée, Hal Puthoff, who else? The guy who wrote the book Third Eye Spies, I'm trying to think of his name now. Edgar Mitchell. Who else? Smith, Dan Smith, whose name was Chicken Little. I'm trying to think of the names of the others. Do you know some of these people?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Uri Geller was on there as well. because he'd been SRI at Stanford Research Institute. He'd been tested by Jack Safadi, Hal Puthoff, a few of the others, Dean Radin. There were a lot of people on there to do with the UFO phenomenon, but also there were writers. Colin Wilson was on there, but I became friends with him, and I'll talk about that later. But they were all on this messaging group that Jack Safadi had set up, and I was one of the recipients on the list. Whenever an email went out, we all got it, so you could see what was being discussed. And I kind of chimed in a bit because Jack had put me on there because he asked me a question about UFOs, and he said, "Would you think pilots these UFOs?" And my insight at the time was it was like a collective kind of out-of-body experience that the pilots are using their mind to control the craft. So it's consciousness and hard tech sort of thing. And he thought that was so good at the time, and that was in 1999. He put me on the recipients list. So I got talking to all these people. But you see, my own experience that started it all, I realized after a while that it was called Kundalini. The yogis in the East, it's their goal to attain that kind of enlightenment. And they can go through a lifetime in trying to attain that. But it happens to people spontaneously without any prior knowledge or instruction. And I found that most the people in the West have had these awakenings, and it started happening in the 1950s. And I don't know whether that was a result of the kind of drug culture at the time when drugs were becoming more accessible, LSD, that kind of thing, and people were having these awakenings. But it also happened to people spontaneously in the West since the 1950s. I researched into it. And I found that what I had experienced were symptoms of this, of what people said they'd experienced going through a Kundalini awakening. So it's not something I could put my finger on and say, yeah, it's 100% I had a Kundalini awakening experience. But what I researched into showed me that, or revealed to me that that's probably what I had. Okay. So I got talking to these people on Jack Safadi's like recipients lists. And I emailed, I had a correspondence with Edgar Mitchell, Dan Smith, and a few others. But some of the theoretical physicists on there, they wouldn't have told anybody. I mean, they told me in private conversations that they'd had that experience as well, because I was talking about it. And then I got talking to some of these people on that list, and they admitted to me that they'd had that experience at some point in their life. So you think to yourself, well, what is it about that experience? Is it bringing people together? You know, is it that the people on the cutting edge of theoretical physics, and you know, they have this experience, and it's what gives them the insights? I don't know, but it was a good theory to kind of kick around at the time, and because these people were kind of admitting to me that they'd had the experience, so I thought that's probably why I'm on that list. I had the experience, and it kind of brought us together, sort of thing. And Jack Safadi himself actually admitted to having had the experience himself, Kundalini awakening. You know, this friction between yes and no. So it's like you have the opposites, the male and female opposites, or you know, positive and negative, but you have this neutral point where the two are one and the same, or neither. It's like a third kind of state of consciousness to be in, where both opposites are fused, or they're kind of fused and kind of cancelled out to become something else, you know. So I started calling that state of consciousness the neutral point, and it's to do with the hypnagogic state. I think the hypnagogic state, this is what I realized after a while, the hypnagogic state, if you sustain it and you intensify it to the point where it's like balancing on a ball floating on water. It's that difficult to get into that state, to be awake and asleep at the same time. But if you can sustain it, then it can trigger the Kundalini awakening. Yeah. So that was what I was working on at the time. So yeah, I had a lot of correspondence with Jack. In '97, I got in touch with Colin Wilson. I got to know him. I went down to see him at his cottage in Cornwall. We had a lot of conversations about human consciousness and that kind of thing. And we became good friends. And he said to me, he gave me 2 books. He gave me Alien Dawn, which he'd written about the UFO phenomenon, and also From Atlantis to the Sphinx, which was about ancient Egypt and the legacy that they had from Atlantis, which he was writing about in the book. And both those books, the last chapters of both those books, had a connection with what I was writing about. Because the last chapter of From Atlantis to the Sphinx was called The Third Force. And that was what I was actually researching on, because their experience was, being in the hypnagogic state and having a Kundalini awakening. It's to do with the third force, which I said is that third state of consciousness between the opposites. It's a fusion of the two. And in the last chapter of Alien Dawn was 0 point energy. It was about 0 point energy. And I asked Colin, I said, did you give me these 2 books because of the last chapters of each? He said, yeah. He said, because the third force and 0 point energy are the same thing. So I said, yeah, right. And that's what I was researching at the time. I mean, it was heavy stuff. But I was able to converse with quite a few people who were in their field, who were working on this in different ways, and there were different approaches to it. So it gave me a better understanding. In 1997, I'm in a pub in Surrey, which is just down, it was my local pub, just down the road from where I was working and where I lived. And it's on the river, Wandle, and it's the place was called Merton Abbey Mills because it was a craft market. And it was just a nice place to go to, to chill out, the pub on the river. And I went in one night after work, because I used to have a pint or 2 after work and then go out. Not every night, but and standing at the bar was Nick Pope. And it was like by chance meeting, really. But I recognized him because at that time, because I was researching and stuff, I was reading like UFO magazines, different accounts, because I found a connection between Kundalini and people's abduction accounts and other kind of encounters with the UFO phenomenon. So I was linking these Kundalini awakenings with the phenomenon. And so seeing Nick Pope at the bar, I thought, this is just too much of a synchronous. It's too synchronistic. He's kind of walked into my reality. I have to say something. So I went over. Well, he got his drink first. He went round the back and he's sitting at a table with this woman. And I think she was asking him questions. I'm sure she had a pad and pencil or pen. And I think she was interviewing him in there. But I went over, and at a point where I thought I could interject, I introduced myself, and we got talking about a couple of minutes. And he gave me his card, telling me to ring him. But I gave him my phone number as well, because I was telling him about the experience I had, and I thought it might have something to do with the UFO phenomenon. So he was interested in that. So we met up a few times, met up several times in that pub. And I told him what the connection was with Kundalini, and he didn't know what Kundalini was. So it kind of that put a wall up really between us because he wasn't familiar with it. So we met in there a few times, and we kind of went our separate ways. But I would see him a lot because I didn't know he'd only just moved around the corner. That's why he was in the pub the first time. He'd moved around the corner from that Merton Abbey Mills. So I would kind of meet up. I'd see him mostly all the time. And I was in the Merton Abbey Mills, he'd be walking around. And he'd say, all right, Nick, all right, Gal. So, I got to the point where I was seeing him all the time. It was as if someone was winding up a Nick Pope clone around a corner and then sent him in my direction, because I was seeing him all the time. But we never gelled again after that, because I don't think he got what I was talking about at that time. Didn't know what Kundalini was, so he didn't really make the connection. But I did. I did go to a conference he was at, and to kind of ask him some questions from the audience, which didn't go down well because I don't think he really wanted to be asked these questions. But anyway, I'm rambling here, but the reason why I talk about Nick Pope is because at the time, and I didn't know it, he was interviewing Jim Penniston, and he was working with Georgina Bruni. And I didn't know maybe that the woman he was with was Georgina Bruni. Can't tell thinking back. But he'd already been interviewing Jim Penniston, and he was also researching the Remington. And then in 2010, which was like 13, 14 years after that, Jim Penniston gets in touch with me out of the blue. And I thought that was strange because I'd just been watching a few weeks before, I was watching a documentary about the Remington, and there was some guy acting as Jim Penniston, you know, in this documentary. And I thought, hey, that'd be an interesting guy to talk to. And then he gets in touch with me out of the blue, sends me an email, and it was a mutual friend that had told him that maybe the research I was doing might help him with this code. Yeah. And so when Jim Penniston first got in touch with me, he was talking about meeting up at the Rendlesham, was it 30th anniversary? So it's 2010, this was. And I couldn't make it because it was near Christmas and I was going to visit my family. So I couldn't make it. I had to get back to him and say, no, I'll try and get there. I want to be there, but I don't think I'll be able to make it. I'm visiting family. So then I get another email from him in January, and on the title of the email is 23.5 degrees. So I thought, that's strange. Why has he got that on his title? And then he tells me he's got a code that he wants me to look at, a binary code. He wants me to study it, look at it, and see what I come up with. So I got back to him. I said, well, what code? You know, I've been following the Remington incident, but I didn't know about any code. And he said, well, it went out as part of the Ancient Alien series, the last episode of series 2. It went out over December, and they were talking about the code then. So he sent me a clip of what they'd shown, what had been televised. And I kind of understood. And there was a set of coordinates that led to High Brazil, which is off the west coast, southwest coast of Ireland. And that was the only set of coordinates that had been given out. And also some text, which was from the first 5 pages of binary code that he'd written down. Yeah, so has anybody got any questions at the moment? Because I'm just going on and on. Just wondered.
Yeah, Mark was asking, definitely take a sip of water, please.
Yeah.
Mark is asking, what can you tell us about 0 point energy? Does it exist and who controls it? But I think you could go an hour or two on that almost, huh?
I could, because as I said, the reason why Colin Wilson had given me those 2 books, and one of them that were the last chapters about 0 point energy, was because he knew I was researching into that, even sort of unknowingly, because I was researching into the third force. Yeah, I could talk about that. I come to have a different understanding of what 0 point energy is. It's not like it's a field. It's the centers of all what we call elementary particles. It's not a field as such. What's between the elementary particles is the electromagnetic field. But 0 point energy are the point centers of all these elementary bodies. So it's not like a spread out field, it's these points. But I'll go into that. I'll go into that later. Yeah, so is there anything else anybody?
That's the only question we have so far. I have a couple once you get into talking about the craft and mind control over the craft and stuff like that. There's a little point I want to make on somebody else, but that's later.
Yeah, to summarize that for the moment.
But why don't you go up into where you were talking about the code and getting ready to put that information together and how you
this is what I'm getting to,
and what it was and what it meant, like decoding it, because that's the first point, is decoding what it's really talking about. Now go from there about that aha moment, and then lead us into what you know, the whole theory of what it is and why you published the book about it.
Yeah, the reason why I went on to all those different things leading up to that, those different events, is because, you know, looking back, I could see how people I'd kind of come across that we'd kind of cross paths were people that were either indirectly involved with the code later on or directly. And Nick Pope was one of those people that I had a chance encounter with in the pub. But I didn't know that I would be pulled into the Rendlesham incident via the Jim Penniston's code, you know. So when Jim Penniston first contacted me, I did ask him, I said, me and Nick Pope used to meet up at this pub, you know, years ago. I said, did he ever tell you about me and what I was working on at the time? He said, no. I said, he'd never mentioned you. And I thought, well, why should he? Because we only got together a few times and, we went our separate ways. So, but I found that kind of interesting that, you know, meeting Nick Pope was, and he was researching the Rendlesham incident, and I get involved later, and it was a chance meeting. So
yeah, I don't think it was a chance meeting. I think it was the
no, I don't either.
The universe that wanted you guys to collaborate together, at least bounce ideas off of it. Because sometimes we just need that little universal spark to get those ideas working. It's in you, you know it, but you're being a little stubborn about doing the work they want you to do. Okay, so now they got to throw somebody in the works to perk your interest and give you a kick in the butt to start thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I could cite different kind of certain events that kind of had a connection with what I was doing.
You wouldn't have been too happy if the gray alien sat at your end of your bed one night and said,
no.
"You got to write this book.
No, that's right.
Needs this book. You got to write it." They're a little more subtle than that.
That's right. I mean, I've never experienced any alien. I've never seen an alien or so-called alien or being. I did have experiences where I had out-of-the-body experiences due to that messing around with the hypnagogic state. And I found myself out of body, and in the center of the room was this orb of light. Mm-hmm. And it was so bright, it was like a halogen lamp had been put on in the room, and you could see like the sharp sides of things because it was all shadows, because of this bright light. And I had a feeling I was, kind of communing with this being, this high being, higher consciousness. And I don't know if I was being instructed or told anything, but I just, as soon as I started panicking, I snapped back in my body, because that's one of the things with being out of the body is that if you panic or you get excited, you go straight back in. You've got to have this kind of neutral kind of indifference or detachment from whatever you're experiencing and just in an observation mode, and then you're able to sustain it. And it's the same with being in that centered state, that neutral point state. Is that you don't get excited and you don't fear anything, you just go with the flow and you can sustain it. So yeah, I had that experience, and I think that has something to do with the phenomenon that we're talking about. And there was a few others where I had an out-of-body experience. Before I went to work, I felt so tired, I laid down on the couch and I thought I could go in later, because I usually got in earlier than everybody else. And then I heard 3 beeps coming from the kitchen. It sounded like it was coming from the kitchen or in a microwave. And I had this kind of irrational thought that my girlfriend at the time, my partner, when she'd already gone to work, but she'd come upstairs and put the microwave on, right? And then I realized, no, that's not what's happening. And then I started to, as I was starting to come out of my body, it was like cellophane. It was like a ball of cellophane. It was just unraveling slowly on its own accord. And that's how my body was kind of coming up, trying to sit up. But as soon as I started to fear whatever it was that was in the, because I thought someone had come into the room because of these 3 beeps, I snapped back into my body. So, and then I find that these 3 beeps are kind of, they're in different accounts, people's accounts of abduction.
Other people's accounts, other episodes, other experiences. Yes, there are things that seem to be common in everybody. The idea of that a fear brings you back into your body right away, and And
Yeah.
once you finally get a really good out-of-body experience, I've only had a couple in my whole life, but one was flying, of actually, and it was just so thrilling. It was so realistic. It was so beautiful, and I could fly.
Yeah.
Like I could just
Yeah.
fly. I could fly over
Yeah.
the trees. I could fly over everything. It was just a joy. And you know, that was wonderful. That was a gift that was given to me to just pull up whenever I needed to. It was just so joyous. And to be able to have that, it was wonderful. And other people, you know, other people, my husband had one once. He was naked in a bottle, in this big bubble, and he's floating around our farm kind of stuff, right? And he was doing great until he realized he was naked, and that was it. Bum, out.
Yeah, of course, that would do it. But yeah, I don't usually talk about these experiences of mine, but I've documented them all. I've got them all written down. But yeah, I would say that those are things that I could connect to the phenomenon in what I've read in people's accounts. So I couldn't dismiss them, you know. But getting on to the code now. So Jim Penniston tells me about the binary code. And he said, and he, as I said, he put 23.5 degrees in his title. I said, why did you do that? He said, because the mutual friend that told me to get in touch with you said that that's your work, the 23.5 degrees degree angle. And he said, I think it's to do with temperatures on the regions of, you know, different temperatures on the planet. I said, no, it's the Earth's axis, obliquity angle. The Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees away from the ecliptic plane of the sun. It's orbit around the sun. And he said, oh, yeah, all right. I remember now, yeah, but I couldn't remember the actual number. So then I told him, yeah, I've been finding all these references to that angle, 23.5 degrees, in different sources throughout history. And I found them mostly in paintings from the 17th century, where, you know, you find Jesus carrying the cross to the hill of Golgotha, where he's going to be, you know, crucified. He's carrying a cross at the angle of 23.5 degrees, or the cross beam is at 23.5. And then he's raised up, you know, when he's crucified, when he's nailed to the cross and he's raised up, right? So look, I mean, even this, what I was working on was something that was, I thought, was big news, because it's like a whole kind of part of the Messiah mythos had kind of eluded people. It had gone under the radar that the Messiah is the savior because he's the one who reconnects the earth to the source, to the heavenly kingdom, which means the earth being tilted is an unnatural condition and it should be upright. And and you get that with the raising of the Jed column of Osiris, the ancient Egyptian god, where they raise the Jed column, which is his backbone. So it's the same kind of thing going on with the Christian Jesus, and that this Messiah is a savior who rids the world of sins when he brings the earth to its upright position again. You see, so being tilted is as if it reflects an imbalance in human consciousness. So I was working on that at the time, and it was big to me because, as I said, it was like a whole part of the Messiah mythos has been missing, and it's really to do with the Earth's axis and the sun. You know, it's tilting away from the orbit, its orbit around the sun in respect to the ecliptic plane. So all these kind of things are astrotheological, you know, meaning. There's different meanings to it. So that's what I was doing at the time. And then Jim, as I said, I get this email from him, 23.5 degrees. Tell him about that. And he says, I want you to look at this code because I keep having dreams about 23.5. And I don't know. To this day, I'm thinking to myself, well, why was that? I know it did come up in the code, but at the same time, it's like it was the way that kind of led into me, you know, where he was led to approach me about the code and I'd get involved. Yeah, so he said he had dreams of 23.5 degrees. If you can have a dream about degrees, an angle. But he said it kept coming up. He was being told that. So he said, look, I've got 7 sets of coordinates now. He said the first one was given in the public domain. It was on that program, Ancient Aliens. He said, but there's another 6 that have just been deciphered. He said, I'm sending them over to you. I want you to look at them, give it your best shot. See if there's any additional information there. And anything about this 23.5 degrees. So he sent them to me on the 2nd of February, which was in bulk. It's Groundhog Day, isn't it? And it's strange because the 2nd of February has a connection with High Brazil and the myth to do with High Brazil, the island that's off the southwest coast of Ireland. So it's kind of strange that he sent me the coordinates on that day, and it happened to be my son's birthday as well. So anyway, when I received them, and it was early in the morning, I wanted to see where they were on Google Earth, on the Google Earth program, and it was dramatic seeing the cursor move across the globe to all these ancient sites where there were even pyramids or sacred mounds like Taishan in China. The only place that didn't have a pyramid is Sedona in Arizona. Of course, High Brazil was under the sea, and it's a submerged island, mythical island. You've got Giza, also Naxos, the Greek island of Naxos, which is the Potara Temple of Apollo there. It's like, the ruins look like a large window, large doorway. And also Caracol in Belize, which was it's called the Kana Pyramid, Mayan pyramid. So there's all these sort of sacred places, ancient sacred places, and I was kind of interested in that. And I got back to him. I told him what they were, and I assumed that he already knew because he must have looked at them himself. So yeah, he said, yeah. So he said, I just wanted to see if there's any connections between them. Then I wanted to look at them on a flat map projection of the Earth, which you get with Google Maps. But when I looked back at what I was doing there, I only had a window area of like 2 or 3 years to do it, because Google Maps had changed their format where you can't zoom in on the surface anymore in a flat map projection kind of way, because it will automatically go into Google Earth format. But at that time, you could zoom in on the surface on a map flat projection. That's what I needed. And I thought, well, I'll try what I usually do when I approach using my research on the 23.5 degrees. I thought, what if I was to connect the coordinates, these places, and see what the angle was between them? So then I looked at going from Nazca, that's one of the other places, Nazca, the Nazca lines in Peru. The coordinates of Nazca, which were found in the code, I looked at the angle between, I connected to Giza in Egypt, and I found that angle was 23.5 degrees, exactly. Right, wait a moment. And it wouldn't be if it was on the globe, because you'd have to be azimuth angles, But on a flat map projection of the Earth, you could draw that angle straight, 23.5 degrees. Then I found that from Nazca to Caracol was 23.5 degrees as well, but it was on a perpendicular, 90 degrees away from the other 23.5 degree angle. So I thought to myself, Jim's yanking my chain here. He tells me he's had this dream about 24.5 degrees. He wants me to see if there's any additional information with these coordinates in the code. And then I find 23.5 degree angles. Then I found the angle of 51, which identifies the side angle of the Great Pyramid in Giza. And then I found the angle of 11.75, which is half of 23.5. And what it was, the lines between the coordinates on a flat map projection of the Earth draw up an image of the Great Pyramid in cross section. So it's like just a triangle, and it points out the internal chambers. These angles point out the internal chambers. And it's using just 3 angles, 23.5 degrees, 11.75, and 51 degrees, which you could, as I said, you could identify that as the side angle of the Great Pyramid, even though it's 51.84, is closer to 52 born in 51, but still, you know. And it draws up an image of the Great Pyramid centralized on the Greenwich Meridian and the equator. And it, as I said, it draws up the two internal chambers we know of, and a third one that we don't, which is above the King's Chamber. And I did a control test on this because I wanted to see what it would be like if I looked at the map and I had Africa on the left and the Americas on the right, and then connected all those coordinates together to see what angles they would be. And it was just you know, it was a mess. It was just chaos. There were no angles that were significant. And so what I did when I found out that the angles, the coordinates had drawn up this image of the Great Pyramid, centralized on the Greenwich Meridian and equator, and using only 3 angles to do it, I knew that this was deliberate. Someone had actually done this, actually factored this into the code, yeah, for those coordinates. There's no getting away from it. It was just too much of a coincidence. No, it wasn't. It was beyond coincidence. So I knew it was deliberate. And I thought, first of all, as I said, I thought Jim might have done this himself. But as time went on and I was studying the code more, it became apparent to me that there was no way Jim Penniston could have faked this or hoaxed it. And really, later on, when I found out how the code actually authenticates itself, it's something that no one could have known. No one in our timeline on this planet could have known or predicted that. And the code predicts a number that came up 38 years later, a 12-digit number, and there's no way anyone could have known that or predicted it. So, and that's the way the code authenticates itself mathematically. So there's no way Jim Penniston had a hand in this. And he really didn't know, he really couldn't get his head around what I was finding. He wasn't familiar with these, with things that I'd kind of lived and breathed for years, you know. So there's just no way he could have had a hand in doing any of this. But what I'm telling you there about the way the coordinates drew up the Great Pyramid was the first kind of lot of information that came, was the initial information that came out the code. And I found all that within 6 months, okay? And then I started looking at the Giza coordinates on the code, and I realized that there was a lot of other information that was embedded in that also. So at this stage now, I've discovered so much. There's enough to fill 3 volumes, yeah, with all the information that's been encapsulated in just those 7 sets of coordinates. And it's like a grid, it's like a spherical grid of information where one thing will confirm something, and that thing will be confirmed by something else. And it goes on like that. So it's like this spherical grid of information interlocked, which encapsulates all this information. And there's like several themes that come out of it, like the Azores. The Azores are being pointed to more than 3-4 times. And it's even being pointed at from the Sphinx. And the way the Giza coordinates in the code kind of shows you how this all works is it's just genius. Whoever encoded all this, or ever factored all this information into the code, it's incredible. It's incredible how they've done it. It's even more incredible that I was able to kind of, you know, uncover all this information over the years. But I've been working on it for 12+ years now. So, and as I said, the way the code authenticates itself mathematically, there's no way anyone could have known that. And it uses the fine structure constant, which is a universal constant in physics. In fact, it's supposed to be the most mysterious number in physics, 137. And that's how the code authenticates itself, because it predicts this number that was determined by physicists in 2018. A 12-digit number, I mean, that's more numbers than you get in the lottery. So
Yeah, somebody was asking a question, is the code sequential or is it random? And you're telling us it's not random. It is set up the way it is so that you can learn, so that humans could learn how to decode it. It was made so that you would, or you and the rest would figure out a way that with enough little clues put here and there that you guys will crack the code to help humans, I hope.
Yeah, it's step by step, the step-by-step process. Which it did involve a few others. I mean, there's Dr. Manu Safesadeh, who's written a book called Under the Sphinx. In 2021, I think he wrote that. And yeah, I mean, I collaborated with him. I first met him in 2018, which was the year that this 12-digit number had come up, which the code had predicted from 1980. So I met up with him. And then what he was working on and what he was researching on, that the code was pointing to it. The code was pointing to his work, which is to do with the Sphinx. And what he says is a cache of records was deposited under the Sphinx's left forepaw. And that point there on the Sphinx is what the Giza coordinates from the code, found in the code, is pointing to. But it points to it using a heading line, which the distance is in processional numbers. And I don't know whether anybody is. I'm talking about processional numbers here, so people have to have a kind of grasp on what procession is to know what I'm talking about.
Well, Mark is asking, are there some other major intersections and what things are located at those major intersects? And you just mentioned about the Sphinx. What about any other ones as well, too? Are we finding a treasure load of more information as we investigate each of these intersections?
Yeah, you see, the code is an ongoing thing, okay? I mean, I've been working on it for 12 plus years now, but I've mostly focused on Giza. And the other places, like Nazca, Higher Brazil, and also Arizona, Sedona, they come into it because they kind of point to certain things at Giza, but they point to it in such a way that they use significant numbers in the distances between them, you see. When I say significant numbers, they're numbers that people would identify straight away if they were familiar with precession. They'd know it straight away because the numbers are associated with precession. Another person who got involved was Jimmy Blanchett. You know, I don't know whether maybe a lot of people here might know who Jimmy Blanchett is, but he's a French Canadian, and he's like this kind of modern day Tesla, where he's been downloading this mathematical kind of code from sightings of UFOs or UAPs, and giving him clues. And all this mathematics is more or less the same as what's coming out of the code. So, I mean, talking about mathematical, advanced mathematical numbers like to do with the universal constants. So really, our work, mine and Jimmy Blanchett's, kind of dovetailing towards something in the future, I'm sure. I've been collaborating with Jimmy as well, and with what I've been finding in the code is what he's been finding is with his own method, his own method.
Right. So are you in collaboration with others in regards to another book? Are you going to publish
I'm working on 2 books right now. I did want to bring them both out at the same time, but when you think about it, it doesn't seem practical. So what we're going to do is I'm bringing out the second book this year, hopefully by the end of this year. I'll have the second book out, which will be a code within a code. That would be the subtitle of it. But it would be, the Rendlesham Enigma book 2. So that would be the next one, and that will deal with the initial information that came to me, which I told you about, that flat map projection of the Earth, what information came out of that. And then the third book will be about what I've discovered concerning Giza and the pyramids and the Sphinx.
Excellent. Wonderful.
and that will bring Manu's work into it as well. And yeah, I think there's so much packed into these two books. It might even have to have a fourth book. I don't know. And this is not anything to do with making money on books. I can assure you, no one really gets rich by writing books anyway. Yeah. I mean, you know, people are naive when they say, "Oh, I'm just writing it, you know, to make money on the books," and there's nothing to do with that. I didn't go into this fields of research because I wanted to make money. My heart is in actually discovering things. That's the joy I get out of it, is discovering new things.
It's the beauty and joy of mathematics, of whole numbers, how they fit, how they work, how beautifully it's like a symphony. Okay, they roll off. They roll off like a symphony, and you can go multi-layers down, layer on top of layer, and you just peel them off. And when you lay them on top of each other, they make beautiful music. Okay, and that's what numbers are. That's why mathematics and music, people who are really good musicians tend to be excellent mathematics, simply because the rhythm and the beat of the numbers mean something to their soul. Okay,
I agree with that.
And that's why you're doing it, because it's touching your soul, and it makes you feel good to do this. When those numbers come together and you see them fit, and it has meaning, and it just all slides together, it's a wonderful thing, right?
You hit the nail on the head, really. That's what I was going to lead up to say, that what the code has taught me is this an appreciation of mathematics. And what it's teaching us is as well is that the universe is mathematical. It's ontologically mathematical. That's what existence is. It's mathematical. It's space. It's all numbers. So it's not something that, I mean, what most scientists will say, or most physicists will say, or the orthodox, they will say that mathematics is just a human invention. It's a tool that we use to make sense of the world. You know, no, it's the base of everything. Mathematics is
just Fibonacci numbers. Just sorry, don't believe that.
Yeah.
It's just rhymes too much in nature. It rhymes and rhythms, and it just pulses, and it makes the world work.
And this is why the code is using mathematics, because it's the only way you can prove something. Because you cannot argue against 2 + 2, equals 4. You cannot argue about it. You can't pull that apart. And it goes way beyond all our subjective beliefs, views, and opinions. And it's so objective. It's the closest thing you can get to objective. It is the most objective thing. So it uses mathematics to prove the things it is telling us. And that's the beauty of the code, and it's the beauty of the math it's producing, which just shows you how everything is all connected. So, there's a lot of themes that come out of the code, but it's all been proven by the math. So
I think the math was made to create the beauty of the world and create the beauty of all living things. And that includes inanimate objects, because I believe they're alive at a different level code. But you couldn't have this beauty unless the mathematics was as beautiful as it was, because it is the code. It is like DNA to us. It is what makes the whole universe, and the higher spirit, God, whatever you want to call him, did this because he could let it. It's like a computer code that keeps relearning and keeps going off his basis. It can go on forever, and he doesn't have to do anything with it, or she, or whatever. It just allows it to flow, and it has a rhythm, and it just keeps repeating itself and keeps learning and keeps, it's beautiful.
Yeah, that's what existence is. It's mathematical. So I was going to say that I was never a mathematician. I would never have called myself. I didn't like math. I hated it at school. Like we all feel intimidated by it. And but I realized that when I started working on studying the code, the coordinates and everything, what they were producing, I had to get into the mathematical side of things. And I can do mathematics, I know, but what it is, and Robert Bauval, I don't know whether you know the author Robert Bauval, he was the first one to show a connection between the 3 pyramids at Giza and the belt stars of Orion. And I got to be friends with him, and we would be talking on Skype a lot. And he said, your way you approach math, he said it's intuitive. I said, yeah, that's right. I'm an intuitive mathematician. But what it is that it's because I'm able to remember long numbers. I can always remember phone numbers. So I could always remember long numbers like the constants. And whenever I was kind of like juggling with calculations or computations, I would see these numbers pop up and I would identify them, and then I knew I had something remarkable there. But that's what was happening with the code as well. So and that's what he said. He says you're kind of an intuitive mathematician. And he said that's strange because it's like the rational kind of side of your brain and the kind of intuitive side, and there's that union again, that kind of fusion between the opposites. And so you have to be in that kind of state of mind.
But I think that was the point of giving us the code, was that they knew that there were people that would intuitively understand the code and know that there was something wonderful in it for them. That there was something that was wanting to be told. The secrets could be unleashed if you paid attention. And that took somebody like yourself and some of the others who have a mathematical affiliation to how the rhythm of the math works.
Right. And I think that going back to the experience I had allowed me that. And I think what that experience was, when I look back on it, it was like a fusion experience. It's like I experienced everything at once, all the things I would know in the future. So it's like after the experience, and when I was doing my research and I was reading books and all kinds of things, I was hungry for knowledge. And every time I came across something and made an insight, it was like I was gathering up knowledge, all that I'd seen at once in that experience. In the future, I'll be gathering up all this knowledge, all I saw at once. So, and I'm sure the code, I'm sure that experience I had prepared me for working on the code, because I wasn't a mathematician before that. As I said, I didn't really practice a lot of math, but it was like that experience kind of boosted my IQ, if you know what I mean, and kind of made me more adaptable to certain things that I'd be learning in the future. And I think it's my approach. It was my approach to certain things, like in my research, that the code needed that approach, that kind of approach to it. That's
right. Because if they tried somebody who is in academia with needing to keep their academia standing and their tenure and their other things, would not be as comfortable trying to break this code, right, because of the risk to their own professional standing, where a layman amateur who happens to be brilliant at doing this would get further ahead in getting the code to us that need it the most. The academics don't need it. We need it to be able to show us that the universe is mathematical, that it's a beautiful thing, and that these are here to help us grow and to learn more about everything to do with the universe and the code.
Right. So
you're the perfect person at the right time.
Well, I kind of looked at different kind of fields of research, and I think that helps when you kind of like, jack of all trades sort of thing. You're not focused on one area all the time.
That's the other thing. The acceptance of other studies and academia, other areas of study, because sometimes we get so blinded when we're a PhD on something, we're totally blind in our field instead of allowing the other fields to bring clues and ideas in. And that's what you got. Yeah,
they're so focused on their specialized field that they don't see the connections it makes with others.
And you saw the connections.
Yeah, it gives you an advantage. And also, I think that I was more able to, what do they call it? Thinking. What was it called? It's when you think outside the box, but there's a name for it. It's gone out of my head now.
But you were the right person to help this code.
Yeah, I'm sure that it's the way I approached things, it was helpful. I'm sure that I was kind of being prepared for it in some way by some intelligence. I don't know. But all the things that had kind of led up to me working on it, it's kind of weird how that, everything was kind of fitting into place with it. Manu says today, it's funny because, as I said, the code points to his research work at Giza, and he's there now. He's still in Giza now, and he's been working on the Unas pyramid of the sacred texts, the pyramid texts, which are the most ancient kind of theological texts in history. So he's been working on that, and I showed him how the code is pointing to his work. It's too much to go into, really. I could talk about it, but I'll just start rambling off. He said to me, "Are you saying that we're all working to a script? There's no kind of will here. There's no kind of will involved. It's like we're all working to a script here." I said, "Yeah, basically, because whatever this intelligence is who devised the code, they can see the past. They can see our past and our future." So, and I will go into that, which is what I wanted to get onto, is that the intelligence, I wouldn't say it was ET or alien. I can't say that. We can't prove that yet. But what I do know is that this intelligence is not kind of restricted by our temporal spatial reality. It's somehow able to be outside our timeline and has a bird's eye view of the future and the past, and it can manipulate time. And it could be from the future, but as I said, it could be just this space outside of our timeline or our reality, which a lot of physicists are now saying this is like a simulation. It's a holographic simulation.
Multi-universes close to each other so that they can influence each other. Somebody in this can just do something, right, send energy that way and help influence more work on the code.
Yeah, but the other thing I was going to mention is that, and this is what got me when we were talking about maybe it is us from the future. Manu said to me, the way this code, what the findings of the code, how it connects things together. He said it's as if it's been devised by a quantum computer, a highly sophisticated one, which would mean it would have to be from the future, you see. So, and then we thought about Jack Sephardi, because as I said, I had a connection with Jack, and his view or his theory is that this phenomenon is post-human AI hybrids from the future, and when you look at technology in a way, it's just leaping forward, and quantum computing, nanotechnology. I could draw on lots of different sort of areas of the technology and where it's taking us. In the future, it could well be that we would be merged with AI, even physically, So maybe that's what this phenomenon is, and maybe that's what these beings are. They're us from the future, but they're physically different. But that's just a theory. I don't believe 100% in any of these theories. I keep myself kind of centered and kind of neutral to it all. It don't stop me from looking into them and being interested in each of these theories.
No,
to see what,
absolutely not.
But
open mind, you got to have an open mind to all of this. And that's what we're here for as guests, people here to hear you talk, because we want to learn. We want to understand better. Some are searching for clues to help them understand what they think is what's going on. And they're looking for affiliations, they're looking for permutations and more clues to help them continue on this journey of discovery. And we're really looking forward to your next book. And we definitely got to have you on again. Come on, we've got to have you on again to talk about the next book.
Thank you.
For sure, we'd be really cool. There's another question here too. Let me just quickly go back here. I think it's Mark had a question. Gotta go back a little more. Sorry. We did the major intersection. Sorry, not Mark's. It was the Professor Paul's. So what might be the implications for Earth's humanity and the possibility of other than human intelligence in the cosmos. But you marked about that, about the AI and stuff as well too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you see, I entertain that theory because Jim Penniston, when he underwent his hypnosis, those were the things that were coming up in his hypnosis, that this was from the future, and it was us from the future. And they wanted to make a change in the past which would affect the future. And when you look at what this code does and what it points out, it's as if the information has been sent back into the past, which was 1980, but which takes years to kind of come to some fruition where it has an effect on the present and maybe the future. And that present was actually 2018, was when that number came up. I was talking about a 12-digit number, 5-structure constant number. And there's no way anyone could have known about it or predicted it. This is something that proves that there is a phenomenon here, you know, and that we're dealing with an advanced intelligence. Whatever this intelligence is, all I can say, it's not restricted to our temporal spatial reality. That's all I can say about it. I can't say it's aliens, extraterrestrials. Those things have not been proven yet, you know. Yeah, individually,
so keep an open mind on what it can or might be.
Yeah, and one thing, and I know that Professor Jonathan Poise, because we've talked a lot and we've discussed things on Skype a lot. One of the things he said to me was that this is spiritual, that it has something to do with our spiritual side, you know, like life after death. It's got that, there's an element of that involved in this as well, perhaps, you know. So I couldn't dismiss that, and I thought there's a lot of things I've read, there's a lot of things I've researched that kind of show there are connections there as well. So yeah, I've always used this analogy that, you know, you're in a round room, much like that round corridor I was experiencing. But when I think back, I think this analogy that you're in a circular room, you're standing in the center, and there's all these doors leading off from this central circular room. And then you can go to each of the doors and you can look down, and they're all reality tunnels, you know, they're all belief systems. Now you can open the door and you can look down each one, but don't ever go down them because you'll get lost. You've got to stay centered in that room. And that's how I am with all the things I research and what I think about. And that. So I kind of suspend belief, because I think once you start believing in something, then you're limiting yourself to other, you know, possibilities. So that's my, you know, philosophy on that.
Okay, I do have a question here from Mark again. I'll check with Professor and see if he wants to come in later to do an actual discussion or talk with you. We're at 8:15. If you need a break or washroom break or anything.
Yeah, I'll have a break, yeah.
Okay, how about we give you a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll do the next questions, and we'll go from there. Okay, guys? 10 minutes.
Yeah. Make myself another.
To get going again?
Yeah.
All right, Gary. Let's do her. Okay, right. It's 8:20. So why don't you go for another 10 minutes, and then we'll let the group ask their questions, and then we can talk a little more if there's no questions. But our group has a lot of questions. Once they get going, they can really get going. So 10 more minutes, wrap up what you're working on now, what you're going to be doing in the next year or two. Are you coming up to Winnipeg anytime soon? Hey.
Yeah, I'm going to say that I am working on the 2 books at the moment. I'm kind of flitting between the 2, kind of working on both in tandem, cross-referencing things. And it's remarkable, really, the amount of information, as I said, that's coming out of the code. Out of just those 7 sets of coordinates. Now I want to describe something that I wonder if I can, you know, without using graphics and that. But the Giza coordinates that were found in the code, the location of these Giza coordinates are kind of, they look nondescript. It looks nondescript, the location that they're pointing to, because it's between the first 2 pyramids, you know, the 2 largest pyramids, the Great Pyramid and G2, which is people call it G2. I mean, it's Carfrae. They call it Carfrae's pyramid. The Orthodox Egyptologists would say it's Carfrae's pyramid, and the Great Pyramid is Khufu's pyramid. Well, you know, the more objective researcher will say that's G1, G2, and the third one G3. And where the Giza coordinates are located at Giza is between the first two, G1 and G2. And everyone was thinking, why is it there? Why isn't it on the Great Pyramid? You know, you'd think that because it's a landmark, same as the Sphinx, that if there was going to be coordinates for Giza, they would be on the Great Pyramid. But as I said, it's between the two largest pyramids. And they think, well, why is it there then? You know, does it mean there's treasure buried there or something? They always think that there's got to be something buried there, you know. And that's what a lot of people have been saying, you know, about all the coordinates except High-Brazil, because that's underwater, under the sea. But they say, what is it about these coordinates, these locations? And is there something buried there? Is there something that we're supposed to find there? Well, no, I don't see that. You know, it could be. I mean, I haven't kind of cut my mind off from that totally, but it's the way everything joins together mathematically. It's the way you see it, these locations. And anyway, the Giza coordinates, as I said, are between the two pyramids. And what people didn't know is that that's marking the summer solstice, because when on the summer, even in the summer solstice, the sun will come over, rise in the east, come over Giza at midday, and then it will set in the west. But looking from Giza, you'll see it set in the west between the two pyramids, the two largest pyramids. And the west to the ancient Egyptians was the land of the dead. Okay, everything in the west was to do with the dead. And east was to do with birth and rebirth. So I looked into that, and then I drew a line from the Giza coordinates between the two pyramids to the Sphinx, and realized that in that distance is 3 processional numbers. So it was 2160 feet, times that by 12, you get 25,920 inches. And you divide 2160 by 3, you get 720 yards. Now, these numbers, 25,920, 2160, and 720, are all processional numbers, as I said. They're subdivisions of the processional cycle. Well, actually, 25,920 is the duration of this processional cycle in years. So you have to take into account the zodiac and how the zodiac signs of the ages of the zodiac, because it all precesses, it goes backwards, because the earth being tilted, it draws this like abstract circle in the heavens, and that takes 25,920 years to complete. But that's the ancient estimate. I think the scientific estimate is 25,722 or something. But anyway, that was the ancient estimate. The reason why they use these numbers, because they all divide down to 9. They all reduce to 9. Okay, and it was a way of remembering those numbers, and it was a way of encoding them. And they encoded them in all these sacred locations, in the buildings and architecture, the ancient architecture. You know, they give like the distance of a wall, or the length of a wall would be a processional number. Processional numbers, subdivision of the processional cycle. So when I looked at the distance between the Giza coordinates found in the code and the Sphinx, which was its left forepaw, but where the left forepaw reaches the shoulder here, it gave 2160 feet, which is 25,920 inches and 720 yards. 3 processional numbers in one distance. So you could measure that in meters, okay? And it would be 658.368 meters. But then you look at that measurement in feet, inches, and yards, you get 3 processional numbers. So you knew that this was deliberately done. because if you was to take the meter distance and you divided that by 3, you get a shorter distance. And if you was to multiply it by 12, you get a longer distance. But with the British imperial system of feet, inches, and yards, because they're interchangeable, you get 3 processional numbers. So it was really clever how that was done. So what it was showing us is that this distance between the Giza coordinates and the Sphinx, that significant distance, that specific distance, you've given us 3 processional numbers, showed that it was intentional. Yeah, showed that it had been coded. So that was a way the encoder had shown us that this is real. This is pointing to the Sphinx, and it's pointing at this, point on the Sphinx, which is the left forepaw, but more on the shoulder. Now you look back and you look at what Manu Safesadeh has put in his book, and he showed this image of the Sphinx, which showed Dr. Robert Schock and Dr. Thomas de Becky. They had done some tomography scanning, seismic tomography scanning on the Sphinx. And they saw that there was these void regions under the Sphinx. So at the front of the left forepaw is called anomaly A. And that point where the Giza coordinates from the code are pointing to is anomaly B. So there's void regions under the Sphinx, which could be caverns or rooms, chambers, which Manu had said was deposited, a cache of records. Okay. So you think, okay, well, that all kind of matches up. So that's a way it's pointing to Manu's research there. And he's found in the Egyptian texts, in the textual record, that there was something deposited under the Sphinx, okay? In the actual hieroglyphs, because he reads hieroglyphs, he's able to see in the ancient Egyptian record that, yeah, there was something deposited under there. But that's got to be proven, still yet to be proven. And Manu this year is going to be scanning the Sphinx. He's got a team together and he's going to be scanning it properly. So hopefully something will come of that. But this is the kicker with this. That distance, that heading line, which is at 115.41 degrees azimuth, right? If you go in the opposite direction, so you go from that point on the Sphinx in the opposite direction, you go past, you go through the Giza coordinates that are found in the code, which anchors this line, and you go further, it ends up right in the center of São Miguel Island in the Azores. And it's at a specific distance, which is in multiples of royal cubits, which is the measuring system that the ancient Egyptians used, okay? And it's at the center of São Miguel Island, which is only 290 square miles in an ocean, Atlantic Ocean, which is 41.1 million square miles. So it's just a needle in a haystack. It's just a stretch of land. What's the odds against that? So it's pointing to this island in the Azores. And you think, okay, so if there was something deposited under the left arm or forepaw of the Sphinx, then if it's pointing to the Azores, that same line that's pointing to that region under the Sphinx is pointing to the Azores, does that mean that the Azores, the knowledge that was deposited under the Sphinx is from the land, which was maybe a landmass there, which may be which may have been Atlantis. And of course, there's theories about the Azores being the original Atlantis and that they are the peaks of the mountains that submerged, the islands of the Atlantis.
More research, more research. Yeah,
but you see, I haven't even got into all the nuances of this, which shows that this was deliberately factored into the code so that we would link the two together. The cache of records under the Sphinx, possibly, which is Manu's work, and it looks likely that there was something deposited under there. And the Azores. Okay, we've got to connect those two together, and the Azores may have been the original source civilization that seeded the ancient Egyptian civilization. And the other thing is that Manu says that those records that were placed under the Sphinx were breached. He says we may find that there was like these chambers under there, or there is these chambers under there, but what was ever deposited under there was breached. It was taken, and that's what kick-started the ancient Egyptian civilization. That's what started the first dynasty.
Okay.
The knowledge that was put under there. Yeah.
Knowledge that let them leapfrog. Heck.
So that is one of the amazing themes, I should say, that comes out of the code. That's just one. I mean, there's others that are all kind of connected. And when you look at it, they're all connected together to give you a bigger picture. So one of the other things is that there's a timeline that was encoded at Giza, a processional timeline. When I told you about the 25, 9, 20 years,
yeah.
there's this abstract line to which the three pyramids at Giza are aligned to. Their southeast corners are touching. So it makes this line. And when you measure that line, it's 2 160 royal cubits, which is a processional subdivision number. It's 2 160 is 1/12 of 25920. And then you realize that what it is, you're supposed to read this timeline one way and then in the opposite direction. It's like a pendulum clock. So 2 160, if you times that by 6, you get 12 960, which is half a processional cycle. So it's half a processional read one way and half a processional cycle read the other way. You know? So, and that all works out. It works out. The date where it begins is 10460 BC, and where it ends is 2500 AD, which is in our future, which would likely be the real beginning of the age of Aquarius, okay. according to whoever encoded Giza, this timeline at Giza, this processional timeline, and it's in sections. You can actually discern. You can find dates on that timeline, specific dates, when you know how to read it, just through measuring it, certain sections. You're able to do that. And that's what Manu helped me with as well. He collaborated with me on that, and he found things himself. So, and again, the code is pointing to that timeline. So you got the processional cycle, you got the axis, Earth's axis, 23.5 degrees. These are all themes. You've got the Azores, which might have been Atlantis.
Yes.
But you got the Sphinx. So you can see that there's some sort of cataclysm thing going on here.
But there's also, you said, connections to other parts of the world as well, too, that have not been explored as much as they need to be eventually. So you got book 4, 5, 6, and 7 coming.
Because, yeah.
So how about we open this up for questions for other people, because we want to get you out here on a reasonable time. Last month we had our guest on for, what was it, 3.5 hours? I don't want to do that to anybody again. It was wonderful, but it gets a little tiring for some people. So yes, and we don't want to do that. So how about we open up to some questions? Professor here would love to talk. Go ahead, Professor, unmute yourself, and you can talk to our guest here.
Hello, Gary.
Hi, JP.
Wonderful.
Good.
Yeah. Each time we talk and I listen, you go in more and more detail, which is great. And what is the question? The question is, what is the larger significance of all of this to the 12th decimal point? I mean, it's beyond a shadow of a doubt now that you have uncovered something. And I agree with you in terms of the mathematics of it. It's just absolutely beautiful mathematics, and blended with what Jimmy is finding in terms of the
Jimmy Blanchett.
Jimmy Blanchett and what he's doing in terms of sacred geometry. There's a lot of good things coming together, but there's also the element of myth. Not only mathematics, but myth is part of this in terms of the long story, because again, your whole preparation for it with your Kundalini and how you tapped into a larger and this deeper sense. What's interesting is just before your presentation here today, I was listening to Michael McMaster's on his extratemporal. Right. He's seeing and you know that. So that's the timing of all this. I mean, you have detailed space to the 12th decimal point. I mean, it's absolutely genius what you've done. But the question, what does this have to do with larger cosmological consciousness and us Earth humans? How might we use all this brilliant information that you have uncovered in a way to connect and communicate with our cosmological neighborhood? I think that's, and it's a huge timeline, and it's a big question, but I'm just, again, every time I get inspired listening to how the process you went through to uncover this, but thank you again.
Yeah, you're really asking what is it all leading to? How is it all going to dovetail together? What meaning is it?
Yeah, so the big question is, well, so what? What?
Yeah, no, I understand that. I look every kind of what it is with this code. If people were to see what I've seen, going through it, they see all the bases are covered. Really, there's nothing anyone can tear apart here. It's just such a holistic kind of sphere of information.
Yeah, it's solid as the pyramid.
Solid, yeah, and everything's mathematically proven with it. And to me, it proves that there is a phenomenon. If there's anything, and I told you before, I'm getting really kind of tired and kind of, I don't know, not bored, but with the whole UFO thing, I think we're being manipulated as well. The information that we're being kind of drip feed this information, and we're kind of being manipulated with it all. And there's no proof yet. Individuals have their own proof in their own experiences, but there's no proof in a collective sense that tells us what this intelligence is. But for me, the jewel in the crown, which shows mathematical proof, is the code that Jim Penniston received. And it's all associated with an incident, maybe one of the most well-documented UAP cases in military history. And there's a code that comes out of it, and it's proving that there is, there is contact with a higher intelligence, an advanced intelligence. And this is not getting as much coverage as it should, because of all the manipulation that's going on in the media, and everyone racing towards this and then racing to that. And it's like this shiny thing over here, that shiny thing over there, and they're all racing. But there's this mathematical proof there, So you're asking, what is it all leading to? And Jimmy Blanchett should be asked that question as well. And I don't know whether he's ever answered it thoroughly or adequately. Mm-hmm. And I can't really answer that adequately, because I'm thinking it's all dovetailing towards something in the future. And it might carry on after I pass and shuffle off this mortal coil. It will be carried on, because as I said, this is an ongoing thing with this code. And someone will have to take up the baton after I leave, and it will be carried on. And because there's all these other locations that still need to be studied thoroughly. I mean, I've been focusing more on Giza because there was just so much information to come out of just Giza that I haven't been able to look at the others thoroughly. So it's going to take someone else to be able to do that. So when you ask me what is it all leading to, I think it's leading to some kind of enlightenment in the future, in a collective sense. But as you know, a lot of people have been dumbed down over the years, so there's this kind of stark kind of, I don't know, there's this stark difference we see with people that are just, I don't know, they can't be open to this kind of thing because they've been dumbed down, the education of it. What's it all leading to? I hopefully that there'll be a lot of people on this planet who will understand it and see all the connections, and it will all be connected together in the future. It's all leading to something. I can't say what it's leading to yet, but that's the only kind of prediction I can make, that this is all leading to something, You know, there wouldn't have been any of these awakenings in the past. People awakening to this in different ways. And as I said, I've never seen an alien, but I've had experiences that are kind of related to the phenomenon. And maybe if I did, then it would probably have upset the way I'm approaching this, our approach to the code. You know, it might have upset me in some way, and I wouldn't have been able to carry on. Do you see what I'm saying? So people are kind of being awakened to it in different ways, according to their own. Yeah.
It seems like though there is a deep kind of plan, something that has been I wouldn't say predestined, but it seems like there's something that has been. These places are not just random, but there is some sense of a plan and a pattern for us Earth humans here, and perhaps we're discovering that deeper cosmological connection.
Yeah,
and I think it's very good proof, the fact that there is or it's non-human intelligence that has been communicating with the human species for quite some time. And you're yeah.
We do have some more questions. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Mitzi?
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to say two things and then a question. Thank you, Gary, for coming again. And Gary has also written several other books. There's a link in the chat, so you can find his other books that he's written. It's just not the latest one that he's written. And so the question is, Gary, which is something you're going to discover in the future, is that many of these people that have had major contacts, including Jim, and you're going to find it yourself, is that there's a language that's been embedded that many people have that's from ancient Peru.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm into that right now, trying to translate it because of my ancient culture, the Sami culture. Wow. And I was given the gift of understanding ancient languages. So congratulations on your new books coming up and your new adventures that you're going to be having. Thank you.
Sure, I'm sure you're right about that. I mean, it's been quite a journey. The journey's been great. You see, I'm not important. It's the code that's important. And I've always said that. I don't try and promote myself. You know, it's what I'm working on is important, and I'm not after any kind of fame or money out of it. You know, I enjoy what I do, and that's what I get out of it, and sharing it with people who are interested. And I do think, though, that it should be looked into more than it's not getting as much coverage as it should get, really, the code. Because I think the damage was done when the code came out, that there were so many people rubbishing it and saying that Jim had hoaxed it. That it's still in a lot of people's minds and it should be just dismissed. But, you know, it's not the case. It's the only thing at the moment which makes me say, yeah, that this is proof of contact. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, if you're too famous, we wouldn't get to have you on our program. So we're very privileged to have you, and we're very thankful to have you.
I don't want to be famous, really. It's like I like my own kind of, you know, privacy.
Yeah. Mark has a question for you, and then I have a couple more in the chat. So Mark, next.
Unmute yourself, Mark. Nobody heard anything.
Sorry about that, Gary. I'm fascinated with time, and this sort of subject we talk about. You talked about our future selves could have had some input into these numbers, and then you have pharaohs that are buried in these events and built these fabulous facilities, also with the intent of recreating themselves in the future. They took their chariots with them, their gold with them. So you have both sides of the equation here of time really may not exist, because you have the pharaohs planning within these facilities to be recreated, and you have the people from the future having an input into the code itself.
Yeah.
Does this prove to you that time doesn't even exist? This is something we made up?
Well, you know, I think about that often. You know, I always kind of pondering on that. What is time, and is everything happening at once, really? But we've had this illusion of it. And me and Jim, Jim Penniston, we kind of talked about the code, and I mean, we had lots of discussions about it. But anyway, there was one thing that we kind of muse over and have a laugh about, is that, and I mean, it's kind of funny, really, but this code, the findings of the code are going to be published. I mean, some of it has already been published in the first book and in the last chapter, which is a bridge onto the other books. But the findings of the code are going to be published in these 2 follow-up books. And they'll be in the public domain, and they'll remain in the public domain unless we blow ourselves up. But they'll remain in the public domain in the future, far into the future, until they learn in the future how to break the time barrier and be able to send information back. And then they look at all that encapsulated information in the code and say, let's send those coordinates back in a message. So, and then it's picked up by me in my present, but in their past. And it's like it's like a loop. It's like a time loop. Where does it begin and where does it end?
Absolutely incredible how this connection of all that.
Paradoxical, isn't it? It's very paradoxical. You think, and you're trying to. Yeah, I think about time a lot. It's one of my favorite subjects. I got a lot of books on time and the paradox of it all. So.
Oh.
And yeah, this is the thing about the code is, as I said, it predicted a 12-digit number that no one could have known about, which popped up 38 years later. And what I want to get across here is that the people have been saying, well, Jim Penniston, why did he sit on the code for 30 years? Why didn't he come forward with it before? Now, he will tell you that he was embarrassed. He thought, that's it, he'd be kicked out of the USAF. He'd be, put in a mental institution or something because he wrote down his ones and zeros. And he didn't know what that was at the time. He didn't know it was binary code. He just saw these ones and zeros. He thought, that's nuts. He thought he was going around the bend. And he said, I would have had the gun taken away from me or would have been, kicked out in USAF. So I was thinking about my job, And he said, that was the reason why, the initial reason why. But when you think about it, whoever devised the code, the intelligence behind it, may have put that in his mind. It may be part of a bigger plan. And it is really when you look at it, because when he sent me the coordinates in 2010, I had to wait until 2018 before I had all the tools and programs and mapping data, survey maps and everything to be able to decode it. So you're talking about a code that, originated in 1980, but would take until 2018, until we had all the tools at our disposal to be able to decipher it. So that in itself is a time anomaly, it's like, and when things were coming up and I was finding things, whatever I found was making a connection with what's coming up at the time, like Manu's work, it's pointing to that, but that's years in the future. I mean, he had his book out in 2021. We met in 2018. And it was like the code was already pointing to that. And another thing is that the code is pointing to this timeline that I was talking about, this processional timeline. And this timeline at Giza, called the Giza diagonal, is an integral part of Robert Bovell's theory about the Giza pyramids reflecting the belt stars of Orion. It's an integral part of that theory, of his theory, right? He didn't know that, but I could see that you need that timeline to be able to make sense of his theory properly, you see. And the thing is that the code originated in 1980. Robert Bovell had his first insight into this connection between the pyramids and the belt stars in 1982, 2 years after the code appeared, was received by Jim Penniston, as claimed. But I believe Jim. I do believe him because, and also he had the page of the code looked at by Dr. Robert Wood, who works on the MJ12 documents, and he said that the page and the ink is definitely from circa 1980. So, yeah,
incredible.
Yeah, so there's always time anomalies. it's a temporal anomaly, the code is. And there's lots of things I haven't even mentioned that when you look at it, and I've got it all documented, I've got it all written down so people can see for themselves. All these things that were going on as I was studying it and deciphering it, and how certain information came up which had a connection with what was going on in the present at that time in the media, or what was being found, and so yeah, whoever devised it knew what was going on in our part, in their past.
We do have a couple questions still we haven't covered. Glenn Gee was asking, could there be more than one Sphinx that's involved in this whole?
I looked into that. Manu also looked into it. We both did, and we both discussed it. That there could be a Sphinx that looks one way, looks in one direction towards the east, which is the Sphinx we know, and a Sphinx that may be gazing in the opposite direction towards the west. And sorry, I don't know if throat is playing out. Yeah, and if there was, and if it was in relation to the Great Pyramid, because we now have determined, well, fairly certain, that the Sphinx was the first monument on the Giza Plateau, which came before the Great Pyramid and the other pyramids. It was the first monument there that was carved out of bedrock. And it was called goddess. This is what Manu says, Mahit. The name was Mahit. She was a goddess. She was an ancient Egyptian goddess before she became what we now know as a Sphinx, with a pharaoh's head. It was a lioness goddess called Mahit, and she was known as the protector of the records. Yeah, so that goes with the cache of records that was deposited under it. And so yeah, her name was Mahit. And if was there two of them made, constructed or carved? Most likely. But the other one, we looked at it and we think it was buried under G2, under the pyramid G2. If it does exist, it's been buried under G2. Because the pyramids later on, because there was a solar cult, okay, associated with the heat. Well, it's a solar and moon cult. But then it became a star cult or a stellar cult with the belt stars of Orion. They wanted to reflect the belt stars of Orion, so they built the pyramids to reflect the belt stars of Orion, but also built around this timeline, processional timeline, associated with Orion. Because they looked in the south sky and they saw Orion as it went over the Giza meridian. Every day it goes up and it goes down. So at one end of the processional cycle, it reaches its lowest point in the south sky, and at the other end of the processional cycle, it reaches its highest point. So they were able to gauge the processional cycle just by looking at the belt stars of Orion and when it passed the Giza meridian. So I know it's a lot of information to kind of take in. Actually, I'm amazed at myself.
It's a subject all of its own that we could go on for a couple hours. I know.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that they did that because there was maybe a cataclysm happened in the past, which is a recurring pattern in the cycle in the processional cycle. And so they created the Giza pyramids around this timeline, showed it was associated with Orion as well. But to give, and as I said to you, you can read certain dates on this timeline, and perhaps there's a cataclysm date which recurs again and again. So it comes around again and again. And maybe the last time it happened was when Atlantis submerged, and and to do with the
we have more questions and we're getting low on time. Did the Las Vegas UFO crash at 23.5 degrees?
I can't answer. I don't.
You haven't looked into that. Okay, so no problem. Next question is this code have any connection with the Old Testament?
The New Testament, maybe. The Revelation. Revelation in the Bible. There are some themes that come up that you could relate to Revelation. I don't really, it's not something that I would say is what the code is all about. There's certain themes that have come up in the code that do relate to Revelation. But I think it's a way of showing the intention of whoever encoded it. It's like clues, just to show you that you're on the right track with something. I don't think we need to believe in Revelation and all the, the brimstone fire ending, that this is all about the end times. No, I don't agree with that. But there are certain themes, certain things in Revelation that come up in the code just to point you to something.
Okay. Is there any other questions from our members here? All right. Mitzi did mark on our sheet here, our chat, not for people not to forget to check on the monthly meetings links and YouTube links on our Meetup homepage, and also on the links we have the YouTube channel, and we'll have this recording posted on the YouTube channel so people can refer back to it. And I do want to, it's 3 minutes too. You got 3 more minutes to ask any questions, anybody more? Or you got 3 minutes more, Gary, to talk about your upcoming. What else are you going to be studying this summer? Like, what are you doing this fall and winter besides working on your book? Are you going anywhere interesting that might be related to some of the work you're doing? I'm
going to be meeting up with Jim Penniston August, this August, one of the weekends. Still got to pick the date. And we're getting together because the second book that I want to try and get completed before the end of the year. And we're going to be talking about, how we're going to publish that. They might be published on Amazon again, like the first book. Yeah, that's basically it, really. I haven't got any plans to do anything other than I've got a couple of interviews in the future in September where I'm talking about other aspects of my work. The other books that I had out before, book with Jim, which was The Shining Ones and The Serpent Brow. But actually, I mean, the work I was doing then for those books actually do have a connection with what I'm doing now. There's still things in those books that I needed to know before I began to work on the code. So well, it's a progression of your theory and continuing forward with the math and showing how it more relates. The deeper you dig, the more it'll prove itself over and over again to the non-believers. Yeah. So and there's lots of other things to do with theory of consciousness and how it relates to the physical world. And and I'm working on something with that as well as a sideline. I've got all these, it's all these loose ends and tied up. But they're interesting, and they do give you clues because it's all interwoven. So it helps give you clues to understand something that the code is telling you or pointing you to. That's why you're the perfect person for this job, because you have so diverse interests. It allows the other influences to come in that they wanted to, because they would have given this to some egghead upper level somewhere. Yeah. But it wouldn't work, because this is a living, breathing, long lifetime thing, and it can't just be pigeonholed. It can't be pigeonholed. It's got to be explored in all its glory. It doesn't end with me. It doesn't end with me. It's going to be an ongoing thing. People are going to be studying it in the future when they become more familiar with the findings. Yeah, it's going to pique their interest, and they're going to get involved. I can see it. Great. We look forward to hearing about your books, and you're going to have to let us know when it's going to be published. We'll make sure we put it on our sites and let our people know at our meetings. They're once a month. And we definitely want you back here again, please. Next time I do come on, I will most likely do a PowerPoint presentation and show you some graphics that back up what I'm saying. Well, it gives you a better understanding of what I'm saying. So I might do that. That'd be wonderful. Right. Okay. That's good. Excellent. Thank you very much. And Janet Mills says here, thanks for the wonderful interview and sharing your research. And she also thanks the administration crew for doing their ongoing work. Hugs, kisses, lots of energy.
And
Thank you.
It's been wonderful having you, and you've been wonderful to come back on again. And we look forward to hearing you again. And let us know if there's anything we can help you with.
Yes, I will. Of course I will. Splendid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.